Hello and welcome. My name is Neal Oade and I'm here with Andrew Games, the writer, director and star of the new film Dandilicious, as well as the founder of its production company, Panowerx Pictures. Andrew, thank you for being here today.
My pleasure, thank you for having me. Been looking forward to it.
So we've got a few questions for you today about the film, some of them sourced from the audience, some of them sourced from myself. So, Dandilicious is a huge project. It's a historical drama which is a massive, massive undertaking for an indie filmmaker like yourself. What was the motivation? Why did you choose the 1950s and why did you choose the TED movement?
Very good question. How much time do you have? So, I've always been fascinated by history. For me personally, history has always been more interesting than today. Yesteryear has always been my cup of tea. There's just so many more interesting stories to tell. I don't know whether that's just because we take everything for granted in the present. And when I look back in retrospect, you know, decades from now, there might be something that's happening now that will inspire me later. But I've always loved history. My history with doing period pieces, one in particular prior to Dandilicious was The Diary of an Aryan Girl, which was a World War II drama, and that did very well. But I've always been interested in the teddy boy subculture. I think there's just something marvellous about that community, from a political standpoint, from a style standpoint as well. They made quite the statement. They were the first anti-establishment youth movement. If you look at the historical context of the teddy boys, you know, post-war Britain, we'd won a war, but we'd lost an empire. Everything seems so doom and gloom. And really, when you think about it, what changed the landscape of the country post-war, post-austerity, was the subculture, these youths who didn't want to sit there twiddling their thumbs. They wanted to do something and change the world, really. And I think they did. I think they changed the future for younger people. So they gave younger people a voice where the adults would listen. Sometimes they would take it to extreme lengths. You know, they were an anti-establishment youth movement. They were juvenile delinquents. But I think the underlining theme of them is about voice, it's about power, and that, you know, young people, not just kids, not just young adults, just young people overall, can have a stake in something, they can have an opinion, and they can hold their own as well. I think moving forward, adults respected the youth moving forward. So we're valued a lot more now. I think a lot of that is based on the teddy boys, and they were way before the mods, way before hippies, way before the rockers. From a career standpoint, I wrote the script of, it wasn't called Dandilicious then, I think it was just called The Teddy Boy Movie. And what happened from there was I just didn't feel ready to make that film at that point. I was in my late teens, early 20s. I wasn't quite, even though it's a young character, I wasn't quite old enough or mature enough to carry that responsibility of a film of that. I knew it was going to be a feature film. I just knew in my heart of hearts, but I didn't know if I was ready to commit to that yet. But I wrote it and then put it aside for a number of years. Fast forward around 2018, I became very disillusioned, very jaded with the industry. I love acting, but I hate the acting business. It's a very, very political industry. And I mean, it's ruined careers, you know, people who aren't political animals. And I had a lot of hit and misses. There was a lot of great things that I did for many years, dotted here and there. had many more failures, which are valuable, but had many more failures. And sometimes it just didn't go as planned. Sometimes it could be manipulation from people behind the scenes. It could be a variety of different things, but I'd always, it's this vicious cycle of success, failure, rebuild, repeat. It's like the song Eat, Sleep, Rave, Repeat, but in the artist's case, it's success, failure, rebuild, repeat. There's only so many times I think one can do that. And at this point, 2018, so I've been an actor for 10 years at that point, and I was still in that same vicious cycle: success, failure, rebuild, repeat. And I was done, personally. I felt done with the industry. My passion was starting to dry out, and I was very unhappy, very, very jaded, very disillusioned. An actor who I know, an older actor, who was typecast at the time, he was frustrated too, but he had a lot more experience than I did. He said to me, he said, disappear for a while. As the old saying goes, how can I miss you if you won't go away? Disappear for a while, work on yourself, and come back with something completely different, something that people would never expect you to do, something radical, break the rules, do something unconventional, reinvent yourself. But you've got to go away and think about it.
That's wonderful. So there's some parallels there with the TED experience where they've found this raw expression and this self-authorship,
Yeah.
which mirrored your experience there with filmmaking.
Absolutely. So I took him very seriously. So I thought, okay, this will be my last chance saloon. If this doesn't work, at least I've gone out with a bang. Absolutely. And I've gone out on my terms. So I went away for a while and I thought, what can I do? Now at this point, I'd gained enough life experience and enough experience as a creative, as an actor and as a filmmaker to carry the weight of a feature film, the Teddy Boy script. So I got that out. And there were a few things about the script that was a reflection of how old I was at the time when I first wrote it. And, you know, I'd grown and improved a lot since then as a writer, as a storyteller. So I revisited it. But for me as an actor, what I also did was I revisited every film that I'd been in at that point that I had access to. I read every review, the good reviews, the bad reviews about myself. I got up, and sometimes it was quite harmful to look at, but I even looked at comments about myself on the internet from complete strangers. Good and bad. And what I did was I identified what was considered Andrew Games-esque. At this point, I was typecast for a specific type of character. So I wanted to completely distance myself from that. So anything that was remotely Andrew Games-esque in any way, shape or form, even if it's the cadence of a character, it was like erasing someone's identity. And I made the character so far removed from anything about me as a person or anything that I'd done beforehand. I really wanted to do something radical, almost unrecognisable to who I am and what people would expect of me. And I wanted to do a completely different style. Wanted to surprise people, but more importantly, I wanted to surprise myself as well. And I was ready to do the film. I surrounded myself with the right people because it wasn't just about me, it was about other people who were in the same boat as me as well. People in front and behind the camera. And for me, it wasn't a production, it was a community. We all worked together, we all believed in it. And the rest, as they say, is history, and it brings me here today talking to you, Neil.
Fantastic. I have seen the film and I can tell you that the role of Marty, you encompass it fully. It's a real transformation, seeing you step out for the first time in that film as Marty from the person that we see today. The much more career-focused and ambitious person. You really are that street tough on film. It's exciting to see.
I appreciate that.
The next question. So, for those of you who don't know, the film has achieved a lot of coverage worldwide. You've had press in Finland, you've had France, you've had the US, and of course the UK, where you're from. You've won multiple awards. You've got Best Drama, Best Indie Film, Best Feature Film, Best Director, Best Actor, and even more. The TEDs and the rock and roll community have been on board, but in some ways, I've seen that you've divided the subculture a little.
I think that's fair, yeah.
Yeah, with some of your artistic choices. Have you done that on purpose? Is that deliberate?
Absolutely. I knew exactly what I wanted going into this. And here's the thing, you know, and I've been slated by that minority that don't like it. It is a sizable minority, but it is a minority at the end of the day, and sometimes I have to remind myself of that as well, so I don't go off the rails. But yeah, it was intentional. Here's the thing, I could have played it safe. We look at films that have TED characters or are about teddy boys, not about the subculture, but about people who just happen to have been teddy boys. We look at films like The Boys with Dudley Sutton and Jess Conrad. We look at films like Saturday Night, Sunday Morning with Albert Finney. And we also look at films like That'll Be the Day with Ringo Starr, and David Essex, I think, is in it as well. It could have even been like Kosh Boy. And before people jump down my throat, yes, I understand that Kosh Boys are not teddy boys, but to me, the Kosh Boy is a silhouette of what the teddy boy would become. I could have made any of those films, could have shot it in black and white, please the Edwardians, could have shot it in black and white. I could have made it a complete throwback to that era of cinema. It would have been safe, and it would have been fine. It wouldn't have been bad, it wouldn't have been good either. It would have been fine. And with fine, that also means shelf life. It's not memorable. So when the TED is at home and he's looking through his, I don't know what you have at home, whether it's Betamax or Laserdisc, whatever preference is yours, when they're looking through their collection and they see, you know, Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, That'll Be the Day, and then you come across whatever this equivalent of Dandilicious would have been if played safe, they're going to go for any of the other films because they are unique to its time. They are remembered, and rightfully so, because it's authentic to its time. For me, it's all about longevity. I think you've got to create something that's going to last and stick in people's minds. And sometimes that means rattling people's cages. It might also mean not playing to the gallery. So I wanted to do something that was completely radical and completely different to any of these other films. And in my, not just as a fan of the subculture, but in my professional opinion as an artist, there needed to be something different. There needed to be something that stands out. Not anything that could be better than that's existed before, but could be an alternative. So I wanted to do a stylized neo-Western. One thing that the TEDs were obsessed with back in the 50s were the Westerns. They really saw themselves as these John Wayne types. One film in particular that they romanticized about was, I can't remember the full title, but it's about the 𝐬𝐭𝐨𝐾𝐽 and the scene where the cowboy comes into the saloon. That was the mentality of the
High Noon.
boy. I beg your pardon?
High Noon with Gary Cooper.
I think so. I think so, yeah. But that's how they saw themselves. They saw themselves as these outlaws coming into the saloon, and everyone stops and looks at them. And that did happen in real life as well.
I can see that with Marty.
Yeah.
I can see that with him. I can imagine him sitting and watching a film like that and thinking, that's me, that is.
Yeah,
as he says, exactly. I can't do the voice. I can't do the voice.
Well, that's me, that is, you know. Fucking hell. So so a lot of the TEDs really fancied themselves as these outlaws coming into the saloon. And I thought, what if we actually see the film through the character's eyes? the film is the portrait of a narcissistic character, and that's not to say Teddy Boy's a narcissist, but this character, and I think that's the key word there, character, this character in particular was a narcissist. So we're seeing the world through his eyes. Now, someone who is really full of themselves and has this inflated sense of self-importance, everything through his eyes would be quite colourful, quite flamboyant, because he himself is very flamboyant, and that reflects through his clothes, such as the blue drape. He is a loud character and he wants to be noticed. All the Teds wanted to be noticed. So that's where the stylised neo-Western came into it. The shift, and this is something that really caught people off guard, the shift in the tone of the film and style. Halfway through the film, it becomes darker, like a film noir. It becomes a lot more serious. And that's because you're no longer seeing the reality of, you're no longer seeing the world through Marty's reality. You're now seeing the world through the reality of the situation that Marty has gotten himself into. And I felt that was important, and that was something that excited me, and it felt different. And it was a challenge to try and balance the sort of tongue-in-cheek nature of the film to something a little bit more dramatic and serious, where, you know, when people get hurt, they do actually get hurt, you know, because he's quite bulletproof, at least through his eyes. He's quite bulletproof when he has rough and tumbles with characters, but, you know, he does actually start to feel the effects of his impact on certain scenarios. So I really felt it was important to explore that, and it would be something different, an alternative. And I'm aware that, you know, a lot of people didn't like that, and that's perfectly fine. Art is subjective. Here's how I would sum the film up in regards to its style, in regards to its narrative and its portrayal of the characters and the performances as well. See it as the middle-aged Teddy Boy in the pub, reminiscing about his youth over a pint, and he's looking back in retrospect through rose-tinted glass. I think that is the analogy I would use to describe Dandilicious. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and it is almost like a very hazy, romanticised memory of one's youth as well.
That's an interesting angle to take for a film, a sort of unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
So sticking with our unreliable narrator, Marty, he's very much an anti-hero. He's a controversial figure. Yes. With that as those choices as your main character, do you feel like you've portrayed the 1950s Teddy Boy in an accurate manner?
It's a very good question. Here's my take on it based on my experience and my research. We were very, very lucky to have access to many documents, articles, references through the National Archives, through the Metropolitan Police as well. All confidential, nothing I could really share, but we had access to a lot. We had access to a lot of media as well at the time. And one thing I found when researching, and it wasn't just the newspaper clippings, it wasn't just the news articles that was portrayed on, that was broadcast on television or in the cinema before a film came on, like the British Pathé films that they used to do before the premiere of a film. It was also the recorded accounts, diary entries, people who were there at the time, police reports, accounts from eyewitnesses, and even accounts, and I think it's very important for me to talk about this, because this has been a very a consistent comment about the sort of controversial nature of the character and its portrayal. The important thing is what the Teds themselves said at the time. And when they were questioned by the police, and even when they wrote diaries, a lot of them, not all of them, but the general consensus through evidence, a lot of them almost boasted, you could argue, boasted about their wrongdoings. And threw it in people's faces. They embraced it. And Was that the whole subculture? No, it wasn't. But it was something that was a constant and a very prominent trait within that subculture. And I will bear responsibility as an artist, as a storyteller. I will bear responsibility that perhaps it is unfair, with this being a character study, you're only following the narrative of one teddy boy character, Marty in this case, very closely. There are other teddy boy characters in the film, but they come and go. They're not there for long to really get to know properly. So really you only have one consistent, continuous narrative of that character to rely on. And he is, as I mentioned before, he is, the film is the portrait of a narcissistic character. And I suppose in that context, yeah, I think it has perhaps been very unfair to only have the one side, sort of narrow, tunneled vision of this image, the teddy boy, the silhouette of what a teddy boy is really. I think that's unfair, and I do take responsibility for that, and I think that's a fair criticism. But I will address this. A lot of people have expected me to apologise for it. And whilst I'm on this platform today, I've got nothing to apologise for. At the end of the day, regardless of the fact that it's a stylised neo-Western, and it's a very abstract take on the subculture for the most part, I think if you're going to do something stylised, I think there does need to be an element of it that's grounded in reality. In this case, it's historical context. And as much as people may not like to hear this, I can't change history. This happened. Teddy boys did behave like this, not all of them. And I accept that, not all of them, but it was a general consensus through research, through evidence. It's not something that's been fabricated or made up. There's a reason why when you see a lot of Teds in events today, there's a reason why when they pose to the camera, they're posing like this. It's not for aesthetics. It's because of history. That was there from the very beginning of the subculture. So I'm not going to apologise for that at all. I don't need to. That's history. That's not a reflection of the subculture today. It's a completely different landscape today. But from a historical standpoint, I think it's pretty accurate. But I do take responsibility that it's one-sided and a little bit unfair in that point.
One impression I got of Marty is he is a villain who happens to be a teddy boy, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
He moves through these things because it suits his self-image and it suits his kind of, his rise to the elevated status that he wants to be. He sees that as a pathway through. So one question that I'm seeing a lot from your community on your pages and things like that, and this is a tough question. Why is it taking so long to come out?
It's a tough, but it's a very good question.
It's a fair question.
I've been asked a lot, and understandably so, and rightfully so. So it's a very easy answer. Why is it taking so long for it to be made? So we started the film in 2019. And if you remember, how could we forget? We had a global pandemic which halted the production for a considerable amount of time, with the exception of outdoor shoots we could do, as long as we followed the rules and regulations from the government. Outdoor shoots with a minimum of 6 people, I believe. So you can imagine even scenes had to change. Scenes had to be cut because it just weren't doable. The whole ending of Dandilicious, this is a video for another day, but the whole ending of Dandilicious had to change in response to the climate at the time. At this point, the buzz for the films did start to die down because, at least in the face of the public, there was nothing really going on. There was a lot of things going on behind the scenes, but as far as information to the public, there was nothing. And I think people started to lose interest. People started to give up. So what we had to do then was, when we finally finished the film, we had to win people back. And that included the audience that was established from the very beginning. We had to win people back. And we had to prove that the film was marketable and the film was valuable when we got to the distribution stage. So we decided to take the film festival route, which was one of the best things we ever did, because not only did it re-establish the current audience that we had, but it brought new eyes to the product, not just from the general public, but from people in the industry as well. And new faith was put into the film. There was a buzz again, there was an excitement. The film started to win awards and accolades. It was getting recognised. And I felt that if this film was going to have the best opportunity and the best exposure it could get, then it needs to continue on this path. So the film went to the likes of Wales, England, France, Germany. It went to the United States of America, Greece, Italy, Sweden. It went pretty much anywhere and everywhere, and it more or less did well anywhere and everywhere. Or it was at least seen anywhere and everywhere, and people recognised it. Which for an independent film with, I think it's fair to say, with no big names attached to it. Well, not household names by any means, but there was an excitement, there was a buzz. So the film then had the base, it had value. It was practiced and proven on the film festival circuit that it could be respected by the distributors. Now, bear in mind, this was all post-pandemic now, when we were looking for distribution. There were distributors that were interested, and some of the deals that they proposed to us, I don't think it was predatory. I think it's a reflection of the state of the industry right now as we speak. Some of the deals that they proposed to us were quite unrealistic, especially for a small film, such as buying a film but then shelving it until they see fit to release it, which is unfair for the people who have not only waited to watch it for so long, who couldn't see it at their film festivals, but also for the people who worked hard on the film as well, for it to be shelved. I didn't feel comfortable with that. Everyone worked hard on that and slaved over that film. So we kept looking, and in the end what we did was we took initiative and thought, right, well, okay, we'll distribute it ourselves then. And we were able to contact someone after pulling a few strings. Sometimes you have to be a bit of a Del boy in this industry. You got to charm your way into the room sometimes. But after pulling a few strings, we were able to get in touch with someone who saw the film, loved the film, saw value in it, and wanted to bring us onto Amazon Prime. So through our own initiative, it's finally on. By the time you're watching this, it should be on Amazon Prime, for it to be recognised as a film. Now, a lot of people, I think, outside of it's not just the TEDs, I think it's a general consensus amongst people outside of the industry. People think that films are made like that overnight, or in cinemas like that overnight, and are on DVD and Blu-ray and is available and accessible like that overnight. It doesn't work like that. For the big films, for the mainstream films, yes, it is pretty much given to them on a silver platter. Here's the distribution deal. You're going to be on Amazon Prime, you're going to be on Netflix, and you are also going to have physical distribution as well. For the smaller companies like ourselves, that's not the case at all. Sometimes we have to make things happen, and this was one of those opportunities, one of those instances where, you know, we had to pull our socks up and do it ourselves. A regular comment, a consistent comment that we've had from people is, just throw it on YouTube. Everyone can watch it on YouTube. Here's the thing about YouTube, and again, you know, if I was doing this as a hobby, if all of us were doing this as a hobby, and we made a film, a short film that cost very little to nothing to make, and it was only took a day or two to film, yeah, I could justify putting that on YouTube. But when you've worked hard, and it's not just you, it's a team of people, when you've worked hard, when you've broken every blood, sweat and tear to make a film, a feature-length film as well, there's nothing more underwhelming than to just put it out on YouTube. And I'll explain the reason why. As I mentioned, it's not a hobby to us. To us, this is a business. We're passionate about it, which is paramount. But so is the business side as well. It's got to be 50-50. Panowerx Pictures is a private, limited film company. It wouldn't make business sense for us to just put it out on YouTube, because YouTube is a great tool to market your work, but it's not the best platform to curate work. If it was on YouTube, it would get abused. It's very hard to control what goes on, and YouTube lacks control of what goes on as well. I think the key is patience. I understand people had to wait, but from a business standpoint, we've got to make money back now, at least. You're not going to do that on YouTube, with all due respect. So Amazon Prime was the way forward.
As well as that, the quality on Amazon Prime is much higher. It only settles at pretty much HD, doesn't it? You're not dealing with any 720 or small resolutions or little postage stamp videos that you can't quite see without your glasses on. Yeah. And the most important part, ad-free as well. You're not having to sit through mid-roll ads completely ruining the whole flow and structure of the film. What you've got there is an experience. You can get your popcorn, sit down with it. You're in for the night watching Dandilicious. Also, from a legal standpoint as well, in concerns to music, we've got the rights to the music now, but if we were to publish that on YouTube under the licenses that we have, that's muddy waters as well. So from a legal standpoint, that's another reason why we couldn't just throw it out there on YouTube. It had to be through proper distribution. Excellent. While we're on the music in Dandilicious is very, very deliberate. You've picked stuff that is, it feels authentic to the time, and it also suits the tone of the film. Tell us about the process of finding some of the acts. Well, the first artist that came on board was the band Furious. One of the actors in the film, John Purcell, who plays Detective Gordon Calhoun, he has a friend in the music business, and John was telling his friend about this film. And his friend said, well, I actually know a Teddy Boy band who are Merseyside based. And he went, oh yeah, they're called Furious. So John told me about Furious. So I looked into Furious, loved their music. And the boys behind the band as well. The drummers changed from time to time, but it's always been the two brothers, the Halligan brothers, Andy and Mark, and they're brilliant. You know, I'm huge. They're good friends of mine, but I'm a huge fan of their work as well. But I was completely immersed. It was a mixture of rock and roll, but it had an edge to it as well. It had an edge to it that matched the energy of the film. I had to have these people involved. So they were my first musical correspondents. But I have to give the Halligan brothers a shout out because they own the beautiful 1958 Ford Zephyr that you see in the film.
and they allowed us to use that to help bring authenticity to, because Marty was meant to drive, that was always in the script. He was meant to drive, but I knew how hard it would be to look for a car from that era. I would have been happy with any car, but they had the quintessential Teddy Boy car, the Marty-mobile, as I called it. I didn't call it that in the film because I know, you know, as well as the blue drape, that would have been the consistent criticism. But it was the quintessential Ted car, and
Stunning car.
It's fantastic. So a huge shout out to them. But it was thanks to Furious that they put me in touch with Crazy Cavan and the Rhythm Rockers. So whereas Furious are the kings of Teddy Boy rock and roll in the 21st century, Crazy Cavan and the Rhythm Rockers were the kings of Teddy Boy rock and roll of the 20th century. They played a huge part in that revival era. From a mainstream standpoint, I know there's people watching this thinking, well, wasn't it Showaddy Waddy? From a mainstream commercial standpoint, maybe, I think they played a part in it. But in regards to the raw authenticity of that revival, it's Crazy Cavan and the Rhythm Rockers. So Andy got me in touch with Louise Barrell, the manager, and Lyndon Needs, who was one of the originals of the band, alongside Cavan Grogan. And they were totally on board with the film. They'd only seen a trailer at that point. They were totally on board with the film and were happy for us to use their music, which, whereas Furious had the mixture of the authenticity and edge, Crazy Cavan and the Rhythm Rockers was more grassroots. It was more where that sound, that sort of rockabilly, raw, edgy sound came from. They still had its rock and roll roots of the 50s. But I think for a lot of the Teds who had doubts with the film originally, when they were announced that they were involved, I think it won them over to go, okay, well, if they gave the film a stamp of approval for their music to be used in the film, maybe I should give the film a chance then. Unfortunately, Cavan Grogan had passed during the making of the film, and I did have an opportunity to meet him when I was in Harrow. I believe it was one of his last gigs as a band as well. I had an opportunity to meet him, and I was too shy, and I regret that now. Because we knew of each other, he knew who I was because of the film, and I, of course, knew who he was. I had no reason to be shy, but I can be like that sometimes, and yeah, there's a lot of regrets there. But we were probably the band's last collaboration whilst Cavan was still with us. So there is a lot of responsibility there to know that we were their last sort of collaboration as a living and still active collective band where they were all alive. So yeah, so I don't take it lightly at all that they gave us that stamp of approval, and you know, we've got a lot to live up to. One artist I want to give a shout out to, who is someone who is not really that accessible, to be honest, but should be because he's brilliant, is Crank Williams. The unique thing about Crank Williams is that he relies on live performance. So he doesn't have iTunes, he doesn't have Spotify. He just lives for the live music. So to have those recordings of the music for the film, in particular, Something's Going On, which a lot of people have asked about, and rightfully so. I can't find that song anywhere. Where can I get it?
This is the song in the trailer.
This is the song in the trailer, yeah. And I think that outside of all the other songs, as an individual artist, that song in particular sums up to me the film. It's sort of hot, it's heavy, it's edgy, it's quite intimidating as well. It's very loud.
It's the Teds.
It is, and I've said to Crank many times, I said, you really should put yourself on iTunes or Spotify, because this song in particular it needs to be heard and listened to regularly on the recognisable platforms and build your audience from there. But no, he lives for the live music, and a very nice man as well. So yeah, he was fantastic. Everyone, all the musicians were fantastic. But you know, the likes of Dominic Halpin, his was a lot more sort of romantic, a lot slower rock and roll. So his music suited Jade Mark's character Brenda a lot, because Brenda's a very, you know, romantic. She's a hopeless romantic, you know, and that suited her, especially that scene where she's daydreaming and daydreaming about what could be of this relationship with Marty. Yeah, everyone did wonderfully. Reed Anderson as well. His music suited the tonal shift. So when it became a little bit more film noir and a little bit more sort of haunting and hypnotic. Yeah, each artist played a part in a different, whether it be a different character or a different sort of stage of the story, you know. Yeah. So at the start of the film, it's very boom, 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 very loud and quite chaotic. So Furious, Crazy Cavan and the Rhythm Rockers, Crank Williams, great, fantastic. Whereas all the other stuff comes in the second half, where it is a little bit more slower, a little bit more real, lack of a better word, a little bit more grounded in reality, a bit more.
We've spoken about the digital distribution of the film. As we said before, it's on Amazon Prime. You can go and check that out now. Once we've released this video, I think it will be out and ready to be seen. This is another question that I've sourced from your community. What about a physical release? Do you have any plans to do that?
Again, a question that's kept me up at night. But it's a question that should be asked, of course. So, physical distribution as a whole. One thing I want to address, there's been this narrative, this rumour online that physical distribution was promised. I don't know where that came from. We have looked back in our archives to see if anything was mentioned about physical distribution being promised. It was never promised. It was always our intention to have physical media through the right distributor, but though it was in good intention that we wanted that, that was also dating back to 2019, before the pandemic. And the pandemic, as I mentioned before, changed the landscape of the industry as a whole in many aspects, the way the industry works now, and also how to view media. So physical distribution as a whole, within the last 10 years or so, it has climbed down a lot. I love physical media, but I'm probably one of the sizable minorities now that really still see value in physical media. And I know you like physical media
Huge
as well.
Collector. Huge
Yeah, we were
collector.
talking about VHSs before.
That's right.
So a lot has changed, and physical media has always climbed down the totem pole over the years. What the pandemic did, not only did it change the landscape of the industry, but it also changed how physical media is respected and valued. Because during the pandemic, when we couldn't go out, we relied on digital, we relied on streaming. I did as well. I relied on streaming because I couldn't do anything. Excuse me, I couldn't do anything, I couldn't go anywhere. So really the only properties, the only films that get physical distribution now are the big boys. It's the big studios, it's the big films, mainstream films. The indie films, unless picked up by a big studio, do not get physical distribution. I'm gutted about that because I enjoy the tangible nature of owning something. the artwork that's gone into a piece, I've always respected that, and that always excites me, and that's why I still collect Blu-rays and DVDs today. You know, so I do respect it, I do value it. Would there be any chance of us releasing DVDs and Blu-rays in the future through a distributor? No. That's the honest answer, and that's the overall final answer, because we've sort of been very vague with the answer over the years. No, it wouldn't happen anytime soon, at least. We could do it off our own backs, but it does cost money. So we'd have to be very resourceful, and we'd have to be very smart about how we would do it. So we would, you know, so it's profitable, you know, and we care about the audience, and of course we want the audience to, who respect physical media, to own the film if they wish as well. I'd love for them to do that. But again, this is the thing. I think, in my personal opinion, a lot of people outside of the industry do take for granted is it really isn't that easy. And when you don't have the financial backing behind you that a lot of the big studios have, it's not easy. You don't have that same access. I hope that answers your question, because I know it's been a constant question, especially with older audiences who still rely on physical media. I'd like to, but we'd have to see what happens further down the line.
I will be keeping my fingers crossed for that, Andrew. I would love to see a copy of Dandilicious up on my shelf. So perhaps in the future, if it takes root, which I'm sure it will, maybe that'll be revisited. So on the community, as we've said, a lot of these questions have been sourced from comments on Facebook and from Instagram. You've been very hands-on with interacting with the TEDs and the rock and roll and the rockabilly community. How's that experience been? How do you feel that they've reacted to you?
How much time do you have? While I answer this question, I'm not going to mention names or anything like that. I'll give you my honest thoughts and opinion. I think it's been good and bad. We're very lucky that the majority of the subculture do like Dandilicious. They either love it or like it, or at the very least, they're indifferent about it. They're happy it exists. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, you've got the minority that don't like it. It is a sizable minority, as I mentioned before, but if it's a sizable minority, then it's definitely a sizable majority. That's the sort of imbalance that you want anyway with any work that's been critiqued or judged, is you want the majority to like it than the minority to dislike it. But I've had a mixture of different responses. When it came to research, and this was why in the end I valued the National Archives and the Metropolitan Police reports, because I think everyone in the community have their own individual narratives of what they think it should be. And I think there's a few, again, I'm not going to mention names, but there's a few who sort of like to control or navigate the narrative of what they think the subculture should be. So the sort of recklessness of the subculture in its original incarnation of the subculture, they'll sort of pad that down. Things like the colourful clothes, there's the narrative that that is only and strictly only a 70s thing. And this is the thing with doing research through the archives, is you learn that actually there are things that may be perhaps unorthodox for individual narratives, but at least from what history tells us through the archives, there's a lot of things that existed that we, or I, as the creator of the film, have been criticised for. Now, you've probably noticed I've mentioned the blue drape quite a few times during this interview. So that's been a very consistent criticism, and I've deliberately not addressed it publicly until now, mainly because I just didn't want it to be a Facebook post. I wanted it to be on a platform where people are going to pay attention to it. But there's plenty of evidence out there of the blue drape existing in the late 1950s. There's photographic evidence, albeit they are in black and white, but people have confirmed that that would have been a specific colour. The roller neck, sort of shawl, collar and lapel of the teddy boy drape, and the half moon breast pockets. There's evidence that they existed at the time. And I will be honest, you know, a fragment of truth to the criticism that we've received is, yeah, fair enough, it was uncommon to see drapes of that nature in the late 50s. I think a lot of Teds who were probably middle class, who could afford the materials, would have drapes of that nature, who wanted to live rough and ready.
Tailor-made.
Tailor-made, very bespoke, tailor-made. Whereas the criticism of saying that it didn't exist is, I think, unfair, because we found evidence that it does. We found eyewitness accounts, there's diary entries, there's police descriptions, there's even a television episode of a police drama. I can't remember the name of it, but they're chasing a teddy boy, and on the radio, it's in black and white, but on the radio in the car, they're saying, yeah, we're looking for a young man with a Tony Crombie type of haircut and a light blue teddy boy style jacket. And this was in 58, 59. Now, why else would they have said that? So there's plenty of evidence out there to suggest and to prove that these drapes did exist. It was uncommon, but it wasn't unheard of. Now, some people have tried to counteract this online on some of the forums by saying, yeah, well, such and such a person who we don't like was wearing the blue drape, so because we don't like that person, it doesn't count. Well, that's personal matter, but that's not fact. The fact is, they existed, these drapes. I found that a lot of the subculture contradicted one another. One person would say there was no such thing as light blue drapes then, it's a product of the revival, glam rock era. But then you'll have another one come through saying, well, actually, we'll just say Ian, I remember when I was a child, crossing the road, and on the other side of the road, there was a teddy boy with, you know, a light green draped jacket, and that was in 1957. And then another one would come in saying, no, you imagine that. And then another one would come in saying, no, to back up, this person's point, I do remember in the late 50s, styles that were beyond the more muted colours of black or grey. They all contradicted one another. In the end, I had to rely on photographs, police records, newspaper clippings, and also pop culture media as well, like the police programme I mentioned. But yeah, I've had a very mixed sort of experience with the Teds. There have been instances where, I've read comments on the internet of one in particular, this teddy boy from the 70s, who said, if Andrew Game shows up at one of these rock and roll gigs, I'll walk up to him and I'll give him a good clip behind the ear. Now, this was when I was going to Harrow to watch Furious and Crazy Cavern and the Rhythm Rockers. At this point, I had to represent the film and I had to show up to these events and be a presence. So I'm driving all the way to Harrow thinking, oh God, I'm going to be, I'm going to get
set upon by teddy boys.
I'm going to get assassinated. I show up and I'll use this camera as a reference. I show up and I spot the teddy boy who said this comment about me. We caught each other's eye from across the room. And all he did was he just leant forward in his chair like that. He just stared at me. For a good few minutes. Kept looking back and forth and he was still like that. and I thought it could happen any moment. And then he just went like this. And started talking to his friend. So I thought, okay, if that's as far as it goes, that's fine. I can live with that. I won't lose sleep over that.
Or an ear.
Or an ear. So there was a lot of comments like that. But you show up, you get stared at, maybe even scoffed at from across the room. But that's fine. I'm still walking. I'm talking to you now. Not headless, you know. Yeah, but whenever I did show up to any of these rock and roll gigs, people were pleasant towards me. The people who weren't fans of the film didn't interact with me, and that's fine. But the people who were fans of the film, who had seen it and were keen on me, were very warm and welcoming towards me. So, you know, I had no, at face value, I had no negative experiences. It's mostly been online. But online's not always the real world, and you have to remind yourself of that. One interaction I did have, which I thought was the most authentic reaction I ever had with a teddy boy, was at Future Yard in Birkenhead, where I watched Furious. And I also watched Daddy Longlegs, who had come from the States, and they were fantastic. And he spoke to me, this teddy boy, I won't say his name. And he was very transparent, but sincere. He said, look, lad, he said, I've seen the film, not my cup of tea. You know, it's like Marmite, pretty much as the character says in the film, you know. You know, I'm not Marmite. You either love me or you hate me. I think the same thing applies here with the film as a whole. He said, it's like Marmite. People love it and people hate it. It's not like or dislike. They love it or they hate it. He didn't say he hated it, but I think he was suggesting he hated it. But this is the thing that he said that stuck with me. He said, but I also understand it's not for me. Give it another 15 years, 10 or 15 years, when there's a new generation of young Teds. They'll rediscover this film, and no matter how well it's doing in other demographics, as far as the Teds are concerned, it'll have a newfound appreciation, and it'll have a second coming. You know, it'll gain a new audience and a new respect. And he could have slated the film, but he was at least objective. You know, he was like, it's not for me, but I can see this doing well, you know, with the younger people and with generations to come as well. So give it time, he was saying. That was the most authentic.
I think that's an incredible review. I mean, that lines up with your refusal to toe a line, with your willingness to kind of not fit into something that might be too accessible and too acceptable to people. I think that art does need to discomfort in some ways.
It
and
does.
I think you did that with this film.
I totally agree with you, and it reminds me of a quote by David Bowie. He said, never play to the gallery. The most dangerous thing an artist could ever do is play to the gallery and play it safe. Metaphorically speaking, you should, if you're walking in the pool, you should continue to walk into the pool, and the moment that your feet is only just barely touching the floor of the pool, you're in the right spot to do something interesting that might be divisive, but something interesting and something that is going to be talked about and is going to last. And bear in mind, this film has been, I mean, it's going to be out to the general public as of the 4th of April, but it's been on the film festival circuit. And, you know, even as right now, as you and I are talking before, it's out on Amazon Prime. I don't think it's even been, no, it's not even been announced yet as we're recording this. People still talk about it. People still ask questions about it now. So I think that's right. I think that's correct. Yeah, but I think one thing that I've noticed, last thing I'll say about the community is there were some who complained that they were don't think cheated is the right word, but maybe perhaps were misled on what type of film this was going to be. To be honest, I think we've been very honest and transparent about what kind of film this is. We've not pulled any punches. I think the promotional material, all the trailers that have been released, have summed up exactly what type of film this is going to be. It's a film that's edgy, doesn't take itself too seriously, but also has its dark tones as well when it's needed. I think it does exactly as it says on the tin. I think people may have seen the trailer and hoped that it would be different, and went in watching it with the expectation it was going to be different to what was promoted to them. And if that's the case, you are going to be disappointed. But I think it's been very transparent, we've been transparent as well, as to what kind of film this was going to be.
I found the second half of the film, as you mentioned, to be a huge, huge tonal shift. It didn't feel jarring, but it goes to some very dark places at the end, which I thought was very exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just before that, you were talking briefly on the time frame of the film. It's been a lengthy experience, this, to say the least. When did the work on the film begin?
Oh God, well, when it was first written.
Not counting when you wrote it when you were younger.
When we first started shooting, I said 2019 before, that was my fault. It was actually mid-2018.
Long journey, a long journey. How do you feel, and you can speak for yourself and for the cast and crew, how do you feel that this whole thing has affected your life? What's changed for you in that 5 years, 6 years?
My word. A lot has changed. Mixture of good and bad. A lot has changed. I was, just from the film festival circuit alone, it opened doors for me as an artist, both as an actor and as a filmmaker. It opened many doors for me. If it wasn't for Dandilicious, I wouldn't have been Brian Epstein in the Moondogs. And I think in the world of theatre, especially within the north of England, that's the role that many have associated me for. And I'm very proud of that. But that wouldn't have happened without Dandilicious. As a filmmaker, you know, some of the pieces I've been doing recently that haven't been announced yet, being a director for other people's films and intellectual properties, all of that is because they saw Dandilicious and believed in me and saw something in me as an artist to help bring their vision to life. If it wasn't for Dandilicious, I wouldn't have had an agent. I've had agents before. I've had varied experiences with them. So I spent the majority of the last decade or so, maybe, self-represented. And I did well. Went as far as I could. The pandemic completely, as a self-represented artist, the pandemic was a nightmare. But if it wasn't for Dandilicious being seen at in Manchester, at the Manchester Film Festival, my current agent, you know, wouldn't have discovered me and wouldn't have thought, well, that's my man right there, you know. I've been taken a lot more seriously as an artist now. I think a lot of people underestimated me, and I mean this in the most humble way possible, of course, but I think a lot of people in and outside of the industry underestimated what I could really bring to the table. And of course, I took them by surprise. People, I mean, just from the first trailer alone, when that came out, you know, people who were familiar with my work beforehand were like, bloody hell, I didn't know Andrew could do this. I didn't know he had this in him. This is a million miles away from things that I've seen him do before. I'm interested. It was really good. It re-established me. It reinvented me as an artist as well. Someone who was typecast for a particular type of role as well, you know, that completely obliterated what the type of characters I was known for doing beforehand, completely obliterated it out the water. And people saw me as a bit of a, lack of a better word, a bit of a dark horse, really. Like, you know, this is a man who's got, well, it was just, he's mental, he's nuts. He's got ideas that I didn't even know was in that cranium of his, you know. It definitely reinvented me. It reinvigorated my career. There were a lot of people when going into this, there were a lot of people who said it was career suicide. Why are you doing this? Stick to what you know. You know, no one's going to watch this. This is dangerous for you because it's so far away from anything that you know you can do. And that was the problem. I was sticking to things that I knew I can do.
Safe.
Playing it safe. So I took a gamble. And the gamble, so far, and touch wood, it continues to be the case, has worked. It's done favours for me. It saved my career. And, you know, not a lot of people knew this. I kept this quite close to my chest. But this was actually meant to be, if things didn't go well, this was actually meant to be my last film.
Really?
It was, yeah. I was so disillusioned and I was so jaded. I thought, okay, this is my last chance now. I know I can't do any more than this, creating and carving my own path. I can't do any more than this. If this doesn't go well, if it doesn't go according to plan, if it has a shelf life and it's forgotten about, then I've at least done something that I wanted to do. I've gone out with a bang, doing something that even today, the most veteran of actors still have never done.
Just to reiterate, you have written, starred in, directed and produced this entire thing.
And I sang the theme tune, wrote the theme tune.
Dance for it.
Yeah. No,
nice,
but, you know, not a lot of actors, not a lot of creatives can say, even the most veteran ones, can say that they've done that. So I've done something that would help me stand out, even long after I'd left the industry, and maybe inspire someone else as well who needed that inspiration of, well, if he was able to do it, then I can as well. So yeah, so I'd go out with a bang, and I would have left on my own terms, doing something that I knew I could do, which a lot of people, as I said before, a lot of people underestimated that I could do, but I knew I could do it, and I just wanted to prove it one last time, if it was going to be the last time. So for many years, at the back of my mind, I had this assumption that this was going to be my last film. So anything that's happened, the awards and accolades that's been won for the film, and doors that have opened for me as an artist moving forward, it's all been a surprise, and it continues to be a surprise now. And I think that's humbling. You know, I think you should always be grateful for everything that happens from your own work. You know, speaking of being grateful, I think it is important to thank the TEDs because, yeah, it has been a rocky relationship. I think we can be transparent with one another and admit that it's been very rocky. Some people have liked it, some people have not liked it. Some people have loved it, some people have hated it. But, you know, they've interacted, they've engaged with it. The people who've loved it and have stuck around and been patient with it, thank you so much. To the people in the community who had doubts about it but gave it a go, and whether they liked it or disliked it, thank you. You gave it a fair go, and I couldn't ask for more than that. For the people who knew that they wouldn't like it, gave it a go, and still didn't like it, thank you. At least you gave it a go. And for the people who haven't seen it because they think they don't like it and have been very vocal about it, well, now that it's going to be on Amazon Prime, give it a go. You never know. You just might be surprised. In regards to people in the involved in the film, people in front and behind the camera. I don't want to say that it's created or kicked off careers, because I don't think it has. But I think what it has done is it's helped give them exposure in places where they probably wouldn't have been able to get exposure elsewhere. I understand that the film has helped certain actors involved in the film get agents that they never thought they could get. Having Dandilicious on their resume has helped them get seen for certain jobs that they probably wouldn't have been seen for otherwise. And in some cases have even been able to get the jobs once they've been seen for it. So it has played a role in a lot of people's careers. I understand, unfortunately, there have been a lot of people who were involved in the film who couldn't get back into the industry after the pandemic. This was probably their lasting impression. But I think they did an excellent job, and I hope they do come back to the industry for those who left. I'm grateful for everyone. It's been very kind to me, this film. I know it's been very kind to a lot of people, a lot of other people who've been involved in the film as well. And I hope it continues to be kind and plays a part in people's careers moving forward as well. So, yeah, it's not been the smoothest. It's not been the smoothest ride by any means, but I am grateful for the journey, because you learn from your failures. And even though the film's not been a failure, there have been many aspects of the making of the film that didn't go according to plan, that you could consider failures, that have been a huge learning curve, and has made me the man, it's made me the artist I am today. So I'm very, very happy, very proud, and it has a special place in my heart, this film. Very proud of it.
Excellent. So about halfway through the making of this film, your production company became, as it is now, it became Panowerx Pictures, launching this new company off the back of the success and the experience and the things that you've learned and the people that have helped along the way. All I want to know, and I think what a lot of people will want to know as well, is what's coming next.
There's plenty of ideas that I have in mind that are radically different from Dandilicious. Dandilicious is a reflection of where my headspace was at the time of making the film. The silhouette of the character Marty was a representation spiritually of how I felt as an individual towards the industry. So that was a very personal film to me. But I've grown up from that now. I've overcame that obstacle. I've proven myself since then. So every film is personal, but you know, it's a lot less personal now moving forward, and it's more passionate and genre driven. I think these next pieces moving forward, I've got a gothic horror in mind, which I'm very excited about. That's in pre-production at the moment. There's a few other bits and pieces, all short films. I think this has been a huge undertaking, this film. One thing I've promised myself since finishing the film is, though Dandilicious did have a Kickstarter campaign attached to it, for the most part it was self-financed. I promised myself I would never self-finance a film ever again, at least not a feature film. So there's feature film ideas in mind, but they would have to be made through a studio who have the financial backing to make it happen. In the future of the company itself, it was formerly known as APG Films Limited, and then it changed to Panowerx Pictures. There is a reason for that. The reason for that is because I want the company at some point in the future to be an umbrella for other filmmakers, not just myself. I want other filmmakers to find confidence in the company, to use as an umbrella to be represented under, to make it more universal. So for those who've asked what APG Films, what the initials APG stood for. I used to lie and say it stood for apples, pears and grapes, but it actually stood for Andrew Paul Games. The reason why I stood for Andrew Paul Games was because in the infancy of the making of Dandilicious and knowing that I wanted to get into the film business, I had to have a private limited film company. At the time, I couldn't think of a name. So I knew I could change it at some point further down the line. So I thought, I'll just use my initials for now, and that'll do. And then the film did well, and it was recognised as APG Films Limited. But I think it gave people the impression that it was Andrew Paul Games, me films, and just my films, when really that's not the goal in the long run. I want it to be used universally by other filmmakers. So the time came to make it more universal, remove my identity from it in the name, and have it more universal. So a lot of people have asked what Panowerx stands for. So Pano as in Panavision, and Werks as in Kraftwerk, because at the time Kraftwerk just happened to have been playing in the background, and I thought that sounds very powerful and strong and, you know, very sort of hands-on, like a German electronic band. So Panowerx was the answer. So I hope moving forward that it does become an umbrella for other filmmakers to use.
I hope so too. I'd love to see more films and IPs in the Panowerx brand. It'd be an exciting...
And other voices as well. Other voices, other narratives as well.
Absolutely. Okay, Andrew, that was the last of our questions. I want to thank the community for submitting so many good question ideas on the Dandilicious pages. It made my job a lot easier. Andrew, thank you very much for being here today. I think it was very interesting, very exciting.
My pleasure.
And I can't wait for people to watch Dandilicious. It's a great film.
Thank you.
And it's exciting start to finish. And thank you very much for joining us. Take care.